May I speak in the name of God, for whom the living and the dead all abide. Amen. You may be seated. Well, I know I'm going to upset somebody, but let me just go ahead and get out there. You're told at some point in time, whether in high school or college or as a young person, someone told you a lie. I'm just going to unmask it. They said there are no stupid questions. There are stupid questions. Our gospel lesson today is proof that there are, in fact, stupid questions. The question comes about from the Sadducees asking this question of Jesus. Now, I know that y'all all know all the different groups of ancient Israel. You've got your Sadducees, your Zealots, your Pharisees, all down pat. But just let me prove to you that I did go to seminary and learn something. The Sadducees, as you know, are those groups of Jews who rely only on the first 5 books of the Bible, only the Torah, those first 5 books, and they depend on everything on that. And so if it isn't there, they don't bring it into their faith and their awareness. So, for example, there's no mention of resurrection there in their reading. There's no mention of Messiah there in their reading. They're the ones who hold fast to those first things. And in Jesus' day, they were the elite. They were the ones that controlled the temple. They liked their privileged status. They were a little upset that this guy from the backwoods of Nazareth was coming and making things uncomfortable for them. And so they posed this question to him to let him see how wrong he is. They posed this question going back into Levitical law about what happens to a woman who doesn't have any children that would then take care of her. What is her responsibilities, her place in life? They see the world an entirely different way than what Jesus is proclaiming. And that's an old story. As I was thinking on this text, it made sense to think of a more recent story, not new, but a little more recent. It was written more than 100 years ago by a woman named Frances Hodgson Burnett. It's The Little Princess. And some of you of a certain age will remember this was a movie made in which Shirley Temple was starring. I see some head shaking. That means you're of that certain age. There's also a newer version for those of us that are a little bit younger, and it's in the 1990s, I believe. But the basic storyline is that there is this captain in the British Army, and he has a daughter. He has lost his wife, and he is devoted to his daughter. He calls her his princess because he loves her so much. He has been called to battle, and so before he goes, he makes provision that she would stay at Mrs. Pynchon's house for young ladies. And there she is enrolled in school, and she is in the best room because he cares for her. As the story unfolds, there's a great battle that takes place, and his troop is not wiped out, but severely decimated. And it's presumed that he is dead. Mrs. Pynchon, running her boarding school as she is, now sees little Sarah not as an asset to bring in money, but as a liability. Because Mrs. Pynchon sees the world very distinct and concrete. For her, the way that she can make something good out of this, aside from just turning Sarah out, which her neighbors would criticize her, she puts Sarah in the role of a scullery girl. And so there is Sarah going from the very best room in the house to the very worst. She lives up in the garret, up in the attic. And Mrs. Pynchon wants her to see the stark habitation where she lives as a testament to how her station in life is. But Sarah, through the cracks in the ceiling, sees stars. And she imagines that her place is actually better than it was before. She sees possibilities beyond what her actual reality is. Mrs. Pynchon has her working in the very bottom of the house, taking out the coal, the trash. And Sarah sees the scullery people and the light in their eyes. She talks to the gaslighters and the trash collectors, the coal tenders. She talks to all these people and sees them as a community. What happens eventually is that Sarah's father has not been killed. He comes back and reclaims his daughter and tells her that her reality is now what she always thought it was. And her statement to Mrs. Pynchon is that we are all princesses. But in her way of seeing things, Ms. Pynchon can't see anything beyond her present reality. That's the place where the Sadducees are. They see entire reality as defined by what they can see, and they see life as a zero-sum game. If someone gets ahead, that means I'm getting behind. If someone goes too far, that means I'm going to be left out. That's not the reality that Sarah sees. It's not the reality that Jesus calls us to. What Jesus calls us to is a realization that at death, life is, in the words, the collect we use so many times, life is transformed, not ended. In our adult class, we finished a session on Richard Rohr's The Universal Christ. One of the teachings, the one we finished with today, is that we're asked to see the presence of Christ not just and perfectly in the person of Jesus, but in the very beginning of creation. That God has endowed all of creation with a Christ-likeness. And we are to see all people with a Christ-likeness. And we're to see resurrection not as just an event that took place 2,000 years ago, and not just as an event that will influence us when we draw our last breath, but as a way of seeing the possibilities, the hope that God has in for us. If we begin seeing resurrection, we distance ourselves from the Mrs. Pynchons of the world, and we distance ourselves from the Sadducees, who, caught in their own myopic vision of things, want to set the world against Jesus and against hope. My friends, we're called to have resurrection eyes and a resurrection heart, a way of seeing the world as one that God has endowed with God's goodness and calls us to proclaim this goodness, to understand it, and to never let the Sadducees, the Miss Pynchons, the doubters of this world take away the promise of the resurrection that Jesus gives to us. May you live with resurrection eyes and a resurrection heart. May you realize that God's questioning will guide you into ways of new life. And may God bless you. Amen.